As Sandy mentioned, I'm a pediatric occupational therapist working with children. I'm going to just go ahead and start my slides. Today, I'm going to be talking with you about a tool that can be used to help with behavior and emotional regulation. And this tool is called a sensory diet. And it's kind of a strange name because it doesn't really have anything at all to do with food, but I'm going to get into that explanation a little bit later. So first, before that, I want to talk a little bit about what occupational therapy is and about what an occupational therapist does. Every time I speak to a group, I never assume that people know what occupational therapy is and what an occupational therapist does. So in occupational therapy, the term occupation refers to the everyday activities that people do as individuals with their families and within their communities to occupy their time and bring meaning and purpose to life. And what this looks like for individuals is that we all choose roles for ourselves in our lives based on our beliefs, based on our values, based on our interests, based on our cultural identity. And those roles, as we go about our daily lives and participate in those roles, bring meaning and purpose to our lives. So the choosing of these roles is very individual. It varies from person to person. So just as an example, some of my occupations, some of my roles that I've chosen for myself that bring meaning and significance and purpose to my life are that I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm an occupational therapist. I participate in a variety of community activities, and I also have a variety of interests. For example, I like to cook, and when I cook and when I try out a new recipe or make up a new recipe, it makes me happy. I enjoy that activity. So those are some examples of occupations. So occupations include the things that people need to do, the things that they want to do, and the things that they're expected to do. So when we think about occupations, I just gave you an example of occupations from my life as an adult. So how does all this apply to children? Well, the primary occupations for children include play, education and learning, social participation, self-care, and rest and sleep. So for play is the primary occupation for young children. Play is how children learn about their world, learn about the world around them. And social participation is another very important occupation for children. So they learn to participate in a relationship with other children. And then self-care is an important occupation for children. Self-care includes self-help skills like the ability to feed oneself, to dress oneself, to bathe oneself, to groom oneself. These are all things that would make it really difficult to participate in daily life and in activities if you weren't able to do these things, or if a child's not able to do these things. And then rest and sleep is a very important childhood occupation as well. In rest and sleep, it's important for children. It's how their bodies rest, and it contributes significantly to their development. So it's important for children to learn skills like how to fall asleep by themselves, how to stay asleep through the night, how to stay asleep long enough to get an adequate amount of rest, how to soothe themselves and get themselves back to sleep if they wake up. So those are important occupations. For older children, participation in education and learning is a very important occupation for them. So this participation in school and school activities and participation in the classroom, educational opportunities, those things are all important. So if you think about if you weren't able to participate in your chosen occupations, your chosen roles for yourself, or if a child isn't able to participate in their occupations, it can have a significant impact on your life, on your sense of well-being and your happiness. So if something were to happen to you where you couldn't participate in your occupation, say you became ill or injured, you might need the help of an occupational therapist to help you get back to a place in your life where you can participate in those things. And same thing with children. Sometimes children have developmental disabilities, sometimes they have autism, and other difficulties developmentally that make it difficult for them to participate in their primary occupations and the activities that are important for them to learn how to grow and develop. So that's where an occupational therapist comes in and can help with a child being able to participate in these roles. So in its simplest terms, occupational therapy is a healthcare profession that helps people across the lifespan participate in the things that they want and need to do through the therapeutic use of everyday activities or those occupations. So an occupational therapist truly works with people throughout the entire lifespan. We work with children born prematurely in the neonatal intensive care unit in hospitals, all the way through to people who are facing, maybe they're in a hospice program and them and their family need some assistance to be able to maintain meaningful roles as they make end of life care decisions. So it truly is a profession that helps people throughout the entire lifespan. All right, so moving on to looking at behavior and the sensory diet. So one of the most important things to remember as we go throughout this presentation is that understanding why a child is challenging is the first and most important part of helping them. And this is a quote from Dr. Ross Green. And as we go through the presentation, I'll also have more quotes from Dr. Green to sort of help us frame and understand a child's behavior. So Dr. Ross Green also says that children do well when they can. And if they can't, we adults need to figure out what's getting in the way so that we can help. So our role as an adult, as the parent or the teacher or the professional working with the child, is to ask ourselves, why are some kids not able to do well? What is getting in the way? What is the barrier? What are the barriers for this child? So to solve behavior problems, first we have to figure out why the behavior is happening, because behaviors happen for a reason. And we always need to keep that in mind, that this child is engaging in a behavior for a reason. And one of the things that can help us figure out and think about the reason why a child might be engaging in a behavior is the iceberg theory. So Eric Schopler first used the iceberg metaphor in 1995 to help explain behavior problems in children with autism spectrum disorder. And it can help us help us find the answer to the why behaviors are occurring. So the iceberg theory says that the behaviors that we see are just the tip of the iceberg. So these things are easy to see. It's easy to see the child that's hitting himself or herself in the head, that's rocking back and forth, that's screaming, that's throwing toys. It's easy to see that behavior. But what it's not always to see are the things that what we call under the surface of the iceberg. And what we find under the surface of the iceberg are skills that the child may be lacking and other things as well that may be contributing to and causing the behavior. So Dr. Ross Green also says that kids want to do well, but sometimes they lack the skills they need to do well. And some of those skills that they might be lacking are under the surface of the iceberg. So those might include sensory processing skills, communication skills. They may be having feelings that they're unable to express to us, they're unable to communicate to us. They may be not able to communicate some of their basic needs. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm hot, I'm cold. So we see those behaviors on the tip of the iceberg occurring as a result of that child's difficulty. So some of the under the surface skills again. So our jobs as parents, teachers, and professionals is to figure out what skills are the child that we're working with is missing in order to get to the core issue of what is the why behind the behavior. And so to do that, in the words of Dr. Stuart Shanker, we become stress detectives. Because if you think about things from the child's perspective, if a child's under the surface skills are lagging, they're going to be very stressed out as they try to meet the demands of their environment and the demands of parents and teachers and other adults. So again, some of those under the surface skills could be occurring because of delayed development. They might have unmet sensory needs, unmet basic needs. They might have difficulty communicating their needs and wants and emotions. And as Jalissa shared with us in her presentation, they might be trying to avoid something. They might be trying to obtain something. Those are all reasons, underlying reasons under the iceberg for challenging behaviors that we need to consider. And it's important to consider those underlying skills that are under the surface, because once we identify those skills that are lacking under the surface, it helps us to reframe the behavior. And it helps us to remember, like Dr. Ross Green said, kids do well when they can, and kids want to do well. So the graphic on the right-hand side just shows the difference and how it helps us think of kids differently and approach kids differently when we reframe their behavior. So if rather than having a mindset, a judgmental mindset of, oh, this child's bad, this child's being defiant, this child is doing this behavior on purpose, changing that mindset to one of curiosity and saying, what is going on with this child? What is happening in their environment? What skills are they lacking? What is this child trying to communicate to me? And then changing our thoughts about that child. What can I do to remove barriers to help this child? And then rather than thinking of punishments, this child needs to be sent to timeout, or this child needs to have something taken away from them. Thinking about what are those barriers. And not only, when we go through this process, not only do we change our framework of how we approach the child, but we also change the child's experience from one of frustration and guilt and shame to one of feeling confident in themselves and empowered. So when we see a child that exhibits challenging behaviors, we become stress detectives, and by reducing and removing stressors, so we find out what those stressors are and we reduce them. We find out what those unmet needs are and we meet them. And we find out what those skills deficits are and we teach them those skills that they need. So one way to do that is through looking at things through a child's sensory processing skills. And so as I mentioned when we looked at the graphic with the iceberg, sensory processing skills and unmet sensory needs are just one of those under the surface skills that could be contributing to challenging behaviors. So what does it mean when we talk about sensory processing? So sensory processing refers to a neurological process that refers to the way that the brain interprets messages from sensory receptors throughout the body and then turns those messages into appropriate behavioral and motor responses. So if a child has good sensory processing skills, they're able to take in sensory information and their brains are able to process that sensory information to produce motor skills and behavior skills that are appropriate to the situation. But some people have difficulty processing sensory information. These people perceive sensory information in a different way. They can perceive sensory information in a way that makes them overly responsive to sensory experiences or under responsive to sensory experiences. So if a child or an individual is overly responsive to sensory experiences, sometimes we call this hypersensitivity. And if they're under responsive to sensory experiences, sometimes this is referred to hyposensitivity. And I'm going to give you some examples as we go along as to exactly what this might look like. But it's important to keep in mind that in reality, most of us respond to sensory input with a mix of being both over-responsive and under-responsive. So it's completely possible for a child or an adult to be overly responsive or hypersensitive to, say, touch sensations, but under-responsive or hyposensitive to auditory sensations. So another thing that's important to keep in mind as we talk about sensory processing is that we're talking about 8 different senses that are involved, which is a lot to remember and a lot to keep in mind. And so just briefly, the 8 different senses are we have senses that give us information about what's going on outside of our bodies, around us in our environment. So these senses are sometimes referred to as our far senses, because if we use our bodies as a point of reference, these senses give us information about what's going on out here, out away from us, away from our bodies. So these are our sense of touch, our sense of hearing, our sense of visual, our sense of taste and smell. So there are also senses that are very important when we think about sensory processing that give us information about what's going on inside our bodies, and these senses are sometimes referred to as near senses. So using our body as a reference, these are senses that are going to give us information to what's going on inside our bodies. So these include our vestibular system. This is our sense of movement and balance, and the sensory receptors for this sense are located in our inner ear. And our proprioceptive sense, this is our sense of body awareness. We get this from receptors that are located in our muscles, in our tendons, and in our joints. And then there's interoceptive receptors. And these are receptors that are located all over our body that enable us to feel and help us interpret physiological states that are happening inside our bodies, such as hunger, thirst, body temperature. Are we hot? Are we cold? Pain, things like that. So when we're talking about vestibular, our vestibular sensory system, our system of balance, when we receive input to this system through our inner ears, movement input through our receptors that are in our inner ear, it's a pretty strong input that can impact our nervous system for several hours. And proprioceptive input can also impact our nervous systems for several hours. So it's important to remember with proprioceptive input, sensory input, it can be both calming and alerting. Vestibular input can also be calming and alerting, but most often is used in an alerting manner. Okay, so how do we meet those sensory needs, those underlying sensory needs that are below the iceberg? Well, one way that we can meet those needs is through a sensory diet. And what that means is it's just an analogy that helps us think about how our brains need sensory input to help us function. So just as our bodies need good nutrition to stay healthy, our brains need good sensory input to help us regulate our behavior and our emotions. And when we regulate our behavior and our emotions, we can respond appropriate to things that are going on around us. So a sensory diet is an individualized program of activities that a child does on a regular basis. It could be several times throughout the day, that gives that child's brain the kind of sensory input the child needs to remain calm, remain attentive and responsive, and to regulate their emotions and their behavioral responses. It's important to remember that a sensory diet must be individualized to meet a child's needs or it won't work. Developing a successful sensory diet involves careful observation and documentation of how a child responds to different types of sensory input and to different types of sensory experiences. And I'm going to go through that in a little bit more detail a little bit later. So this is so exciting. I am very excited and very happy to let our participants know that Sensational Brain, which is a company that has a product called BrainWorks, has donated to all of the participants in our workshop access to their online sensory diet creation tool. So I'm going to give you a lot of information about that and how to use this tool to create a successful sensory diet to use with children. So this slide just shows the login information. You're going to go to www.sensationalbrain.com. You're going to log in with the username Smiles for Speech and with the password SCF Virtual 2020. And then on the right-hand side of the home page, you will you'll see a blue paint swat and click Members. And then you can also click you'll also see where you can click on the Are You a BrainWorks member? And it will take you to the member areas page. So I'm going to show you all of this in just a little bit. First, I just want to give you a little bit of an introduction into what you are going to see when we go to the website. So BrainWorks is a sensory diet creation tool. It consists of color-coded sensory diet activity cards that can be chosen to customize a sensory diet plan for individuals. And these sensory activities can be used for children, for teenagers, and for adults. So for individuals, but it can also be used for a group of children, such as in a classroom. It was made to be easy for professionals and parents to use. The activity cards can be used with different templates to create different types of visual presentation when you're doing a sensory diet. So the BrainWorks color-coded system uses a traffic light analogy with the colors red, yellow, and green to indicate which activities are calming, which activities are alerting, and which activities help the brain maintain a just right level of sensory self-regulation. There are two different types of cards that you're going to be seeing. One is what's called the BrainWorks original cards, and those original cards are the ones that are color-coded. They have arrows in the top right-hand corner, and I'll show you this later when we actually look at the website. Those arrows correspond to the type of activity that's pictured on the card, whether or not it's a calming activity, a learning activity, or a just right activity. But you can also use the BrainWorks Your Way cards. These just have a black border around them, and you can customize these cards using a color that you can assign to whatever color, whether or not it's a calming, alerting, or just right activity. The program has 3 different sensory diet templates: a file folder, a key ring, and a first then schedule. It's very important once we get into looking at the website and look into getting into the color-coded system to understand the color-coded system that BrainWorks uses. So you're going to see green activities. These activities are best for kids who are under responsive to sensory information and for kids who are sensory seekers. So these are the activities that are going to be alerting for most kids. The yellow activities are going to be activities that encourage a child to change their behavior so that they can focus their attention or to maintain a calm level of self-regulation so that they can focus. The red arrow activities are activities that will help a child or a person slow and calm themselves down. So these are the activities that you would use, that you would choose if you see a child who's really overwhelmed and really stressed. So when you go to BrainWorks website, I highly recommend that you start with, there's a 60-minute free video that the creator of the BrainWorks materials made that is an introduction to the BrainWorks approach for effective sensory diets, and I highly recommend that you start there with that free introduction video. And then after you watch the video, you're going to go to the membership page where you will find a quick start guide, and you're just going to follow the directions on that quick start guide. So one of the things that the quick start guide is going to direct you to do first is to complete a sensory symptoms checklist. And I'll show you a picture of what that looks like. So you're going to be able to print this off from the website, and the sensory systems checklist is organized by sensory system. So you'll see tactile system, the proprioceptive system, the vestibular system. And under each sensory system on the left-hand side, you will see signs of over-responsiveness, and on the right-hand side, you'll see signs of under-responsiveness. So you'll go through the checklist for each child or each individual that you're creating a sensory diet for, and you'll just put a check mark next to the behaviors that you see under each of the sensory systems. And this is the second page of the checklist that covers the auditory, the visual, the interoception, and the taste and smell senses. So after you do that, you're going to look at that list and you're going to look and see, are most of the check marks that you made on the left-hand side of that list or on the right-hand side? So remember, the left-hand column indicates that the child is over-responsive, so you're going to use primarily the calming activities or the red activities for that child. If most of the check marks are in the right-hand side of the column, your child is probably more under-responsive and you're going to be using the green arrow activities. So those are the alerting activities. So just a note about the activity cards before we take a look at the website. The activities that are shown on the cards can be adapted to use the things that you have on hand readily available. So be creative when you're thinking about how to meet the sensory needs of children and adults. So you just want to be sure that however you adapt the activity, that activity is giving the same type of sensory information, sensory input that is shown on the card. So on the website, and I'll show you where this is, there's a product manual. And in that product manual, you will find a description, a written description of all the activities that are shown on the activity cards. So you just want to make sure when you make your adaptations that the activity that you come up with replicates the type of sensory input shown on the card. So for example, you can see the card, the first card that I have shown here, shows a picture of an adult applying pressure on a large therapy ball and rolling that therapy ball back and forth on the child's body. So if you don't have a large therapy ball, it's okay. You can use other things to give that child firm, deep pressure. So for example, you can use a pillow and just put that pillow on top of the child and use your hands to push on the pillow to give that child firm sensory input. You can use a rolling pin, and there's actually an activity card in this program that shows using a rolling pin to give deep pressure to a child. So the second card that I have here are hand exercise tools. If you don't have hand exercise tools, it's okay. You can use Play-Doh. You can give a child Play-Doh to put in their hands and to squeeze. So the hand exercise tools that are shown in the picture are tools that are used in the hands to squeeze, and they give resistance. You can do the same thing with Play-Doh. So just keep in mind that you can adapt these activities. And before we take a look at the website, I just want to say a big thank you to Glenn Wild. She's the occupational therapist and creator and owner of Sensational Brain. She developed the BrainWorks program. She generously donated access to this online program for all of our participants today. And when I first contacted Gwen about the possibility of making a donation to our program, she immediately responded with enthusiasm. She was so excited about this program and so excited to donate access to her materials to be able to help our participants. So I'm just gonna stop sharing my slide screen for just a second, and I'm gonna take you to the website so that we can take a look, a quick look at the website, and you can see what the website looks like. Okay, so this is what you're going to see when you log on to the website. So let me just move things around a little bit here. So as I mentioned in the slides, I highly recommend that the first thing you do when you log on to this website is to access that free webinar, the introduction to the BrainWorks method for developing a sensory diet. So in order to do that, you're going to go to this continuing education green icon here, and you're going to scroll down to view on-demand webinars. And then you'll see a screen where you can search webinars, and the easiest way to find this is to search by speaker. Scroll all the way down to Gwen Wild. Search webinars. And Gwen's free webinar is on the second page. And it's right down here at the very bottom, an introduction to the BrainWorks approach for sensory diets. Okay, so you'll be able to access that. So after you've watched that, you're going to go back to the BrainWorks program right here. Click on the members area and go down to the quick start guide. And you're just going to follow the directions on this quick start guide. And it gives you, again, an overview of the BrainWorks Arrow system. So the first thing that the quick start guide tells you to do is that you're going to print out let me scroll down a little bit here. You're going to, let me go back. Let me go back to this members area. Here, okay. So the quick start guide will just give you some basic information and some assistance on how to start the program. Another really helpful resource that you're going to want to access is the BrainWorks product manual, and it's right here, and it has a lot of information in it. It also has the quick start guide in it. So when you go to this quick start guide, you're going to see the first thing that it asks you to do is to fill out the sensory systems checklist. So you're going to go to that sensory systems checklist, fill that out. Then you're going to look at whether or not whether or not your check marks in the sensory systems checklist are on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. And then under this overview, again, it will tell you that if your sensory systems checklist for the child that you're working with are on the under-responsive side, then you're going to use green arrow activities. Over responsive side, you're going to use the red arrow activities, and then the yellow arrow activities for to help a person kind of keep that even keel level of sensory responsiveness for that. So go through here. There's lots of information. I'm going to go back to the website here. They want to show you some other things that you're going to see on this website. So you're going to notice a section called sensory diet formats. And if you click on that, these are the templates that I was referring to. So one of the formats that you can put your information into is a file folder. So you'll see that here. It's just a file folder on the outside. And then on the inside, you're going to list the cards that you print out under 3 different categories: the red, the yellow, and the green activities. You can also use a key ring tool, and this is helpful for older children, so it's small, that just has the pictures that a child can maybe put in their pocket or access whenever they need to, as a visual cue for activities that they can do when they need to change their level of self-regulation to help them make an appropriate response to what's going on around them. Then you can create a first-then board, which just shows kids. I think this will show us a bigger picture of it here. Nope, it didn't show us a bigger picture. So this kind of goes back to what Jalissa was talking about in her presentation. This is a way that you can empower a child to make choices and also break up an activity into different steps. So you can tell a child, first we do whatever activity the child needs to do, then we take a sensory break, and you can choose one of the activities that you came up with when you created the child's sensory diet to help them get the sensory input that they need to be able to participate in the activities that they need to do. You'll see sensory strategy summaries on this website, which will help you with, say you have an over responder. So this will give you some ideas and some activities to do with your over responder. It also shows a page for under responders. It also breaks this up by age groups. So if we go back to the members area and we go to select and print, this is how you're going to generate and select the cards that you want to use, the activity cards that you want to use. Go up to the top and select the age group and say I'm working with a toddler or a young child. I'm going to select babies and children. And then down here, I'll see all the cards that are related to that age group. So if I've done my sensory questionnaire and I know that I have a toddler who needs to calm down, and there's also, this also comes in different languages, so that's why you're seeing the different languages here on some of these. So let's say I have a toddler or a young child. I've done the sensory questionnaire, and I know that my child that I'm working with needs calming activities. So I'm just going to pick some calming activities that this child needs. And I'm going to grab them and drop them over onto my squares here. And then I'm going to keep going, whatever calming activities I think the child's going to need, however many that I find is appropriate on each of these different pages. And then you're going to be able to print your cards out. And then once you get them printed out, you can use them however you want to. You can put them in one of these three formats if you'd like to, the folder format. And if you go onto this website, it will go into more detail on how to put together a folder, how to put together a key ring, and how to put together a first then board. So that's the basics of using the program and using the website. I know as you get into this and start using this, you're probably going to have a lot of questions. That's okay. email us and we will get the help that you need and help you figure out what you need to do to make this successful for the kids that you work with. All right, thank you so much, everyone. I hope this was helpful to you. And like I said, if you have questions, you have trouble accessing the website, send us an email and help is available.